Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, wherever you're listening from. It's me, Lisa, and this is Untitled, the podcast without a name. Before I start, I want to say something. We all live in the same world, and I think most of us can feel that this world, and not just right now, is a pretty intense place. The political situation in many countries is messed up, really bad, complicated. There are wars happening around us, and environmental changes are affecting our planet for decades now. For many people, the future feels kind of uncertain, I want to say. I think many of us carry a certain level of fear and tension simply from living in this world every day, observing what is going on, and trying to navigate through all of this. I want to make clear when I talk about my childhood experiences, I'm aware that out there are people in this world who grow up under much more extreme and painful circumstances. I mean, like I said, war zones, or maybe deep poverty, or in households with severe abuse and violence. And I also personally know people who had difficult childhoods that were far more severe than anything I experienced myself. My intention here is not to compare my life or my childhood with any of those realities. And it is definitely not my intention to put myself in a victim role. Nothing like that. I also don't want to go into too much of my childhood. Um, just enough and as little as possible, and just enough to make my point clear. From the outside, my childhood probably didn't look dramatic. There was not constant chaos or extreme violence going on. And the physical punishment that sometimes happened in my family was something that was, or still is, normal in many households today. What I want to talk about today is not about comparing suffering. It's about understanding how childhood experiences are felt and processed by a child. And just because something doesn't look severe from the outside, still shape how a child experiences love and safety and connection and boundaries and belonging. So, this episode is simply a reflection on my own childhood and my own experience. I want to show how certain patterns from childhood can still show up in adulthood. And maybe for some of you listening, part of that reflection might resonate with your own experience as well. So, if you know me, you probably wouldn't describe me as someone who constantly needs attention or validation from other people. I'm actually someone who doesn't really care too much about what, let's say, quote unquote, most people think. I do what feels right for me and I trust my decision for the most part. And I generally feel stable in who I am as a person. But I've been reflecting on a topic, um, yeah, on validation and reassurance. So, what I mean by that is how childhood experiences can still live inside us when, even when we feel like we've done a lot of healing and growth, and even when we believe we've mostly moved on from the past. I do see some things from my childhood coming up from time to time. It happens. And that's not always comfortable. I've noticed that when someone becomes really important to me, if someone I look up to, when someone's opinion carries real weight for me, that's when it happens. Certain patterns from my past start showing up. And those reactions feel much older than the actual situation itself. So I know, okay, this is something I know from my younger years. And yeah, it is. So the situation is that's a fact. Trauma is not simply what happens to us, trauma is what happens inside of us as a result of what happens. And I think that distinction is really important, because when we hear the word quote unquote trauma, we often think about extreme events. But trauma can also come from experiences where a child felt unseen, unheard, not supported, or simply alone. And childhood experiences are not only defined by what parents intended to give their children, they are defined by what the child actually experiences. So it's not only about the intention of the parents. Maybe, parents may love their children deeply and still be unable to meet certain emotional needs. And that doesn't automatically mean the parents were bad people. Often parents simply did or do the best they could or can with what they know or knew and what they themselves experienced growing up. And I'm not making excuses, but that's often the reality. And when I reflect on my childhood today, I try to look at it with that understanding. I know that my parents intentionally never really wanted to do something bad. In their minds, they probably believed they were doing everything they could for us. But like I said, parents doesn't raise children only with their good intentions. They also raise their children with their own history. And when it comes to my parents, both of them grew up with their own experiences, their own wounds, their own patterns, and often people simply repeat what they know. And maybe they want to do better, but it doesn't always work out that easily. It takes a lot of reflection and awareness and work to change patterns and behavior. So, in many ways, my parents were two people with their own unresolved experiences trying to raise children while carrying those patterns. And my sister and I actually had very different experiences growing up. So, when I tried to speak out, to speak about my needs or my feelings, I was often seen as the quote unquote troublemaker. And I didn't want to create problems. I was trying to express that something wasn't okay. And I remember so many moments very clearly, but there is one moment or one situation. Um, I once wrote a letter to my parents where I said something like, "You don't love me, and you love blah, 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 and that's why I don't want to be here anymore." And I think many people know what I'm talking about. So many children, they pack their backpacks and they walk out. Of course, I didn't actually run away. But the feeling behind that situation was real. I truly felt unseen and unheard and unloved. And when I look at that situation today or my whole childhood, I really try to understand both sides. As a child, that experience shaped how my nervous system developed and how I saw, especially relationships, when I got older. But as an adult, I can also see that my parents were acting out of their own conditioning. And yeah, that's just what happened. And that is something many families share. Patterns travel from one generation to the next until someone begins to understand them and look at them differently. And that's what I do. And this is what we often mean when we talk about quote unquote breaking the cycle, right? So, my mom has always been someone with a very big heart for people who were struggling or who had less than we had. And she invited friends all the time for, lunch or dinner, whatever. And to be honest, we didn't grow up with a lot of money either, but we always had enough food. I want to make that clear too. We had enough food and the basics we needed. So when my mom invited friends over or saw families who had less or children who needed something, she wanted to help them and give them stuff, and she wanted to give them a good time. And looking back today as an adult, I think it was not only her quote unquote big heart. I also think part of it may have been her own pattern of receiving validation and positive attention through helping others and giving stuff to people, like through giving. And I think that's actually very common. I see that in a few people I know. And that doesn't mean the people are bad, you know? But sometimes people seek validation through giving. You can clearly see that. But as a child, that situation was confusing. So I saw my mom giving attention and care, not just to my sister, to other people. While at the same time, I often felt like my own emotional needs were not really being seen. And this is not about blaming my parents or blaming my mom or anything. It's simply the emotional experience I had as a child. So when children feel unseen or unheard for a long period of time, they often start reacting in different ways. In my case, I had many conflicts, especially with my mom, or almost, I mean, only with my mom. And sometimes when things became too much, I remember hearing things like, stop talking, go into your room. My mom didn't know how to handle these kind of situations. So, as an adult, you can understand that the parent may be overwhelmed. And when it was too much for her, she was avoidant. As a child, you cannot see it that way. Instead, you internalize something, you start thinking maybe something about you is wrong. You're not okay, you're not enough, stuff like that. And those messages can become deeply rooted inside a child. So early in my life, I developed an eating disorder, and that became something I struggled with for more than 20 years. Eating disorders are complex and usually come from many different factors. And for me, yeah, it was because of these internal conflicts and emotional struggles I had. And it was not about being skinny for me. A big part of it was I wanted to be different. I wanted to separate myself from my family, especially from my mom. And when you live with something like that for more than 2 decades, it becomes part of you. Even when you heal and grow, the patterns that formed during those early important years don't just disappear overnight. They stay somewhere inside you. And yeah, fast forward to adulthood. I am 41 years old now. I can honestly say that I'm in a really good place mentally and emotionally. I've done a lot of work on myself. I've reflected on many things and I've grown a lot. But like I said earlier, I've noticed that when a relationship becomes emotionally important and someone's opinion truly matters to me, criticism can affect me much more deeply than I would like. And that means it triggers something much older from my childhood. And when I realized that those reactions were connected to patterns from my past, I understood that there was still work to do and is still work to do. So, over the past 2 years, especially, something has changed for me. I've become much more aware of when those patterns show up. And man, sometimes I need someone to help me to see that. Uh, so, yeah, but that awareness had made a big difference. Most of the time, I can step back and reflect instead of reacting immediately. And I think that's growth. And the willingness to work on yourself, that's important. So, there's another layer to all of this. That is my relationship with running. When I was a kid, I was never really involved in any sports. I never accomplished anything big in that area. I never had moments when people gave me recognition for something I achieved. So sometimes I think my running journey is also connected to my childhood. Not because I want to prove something to others, because I want to prove something to myself. Running gives me a space where I can challenge myself and experience what it feels like to accomplish something difficult. And maybe in a way, it's also a way of giving myself the recognition I never really experienced growing up. And again, this is not about blaming anyone, it's about understanding myself. And, growth doesn't happen overnight. I always say that. It's a lifelong process and it's a lifelong responsibility. We are always learning something new about ourselves. So, if you ever notice something similar in your own life, if you notice that certain people's opinions affect you more than others, it might be worth asking yourself where that feeling comes from. because often those reactions are connected to something that happened long before that present moment. And like I said, our childhood doesn't disappear just because we grow up. Something beautiful is that as adults, we have something we didn't have as children, and that's awareness, and we have a choice. And that awareness allows us to understand ourselves better and to keep becoming better versions of ourselves, because becoming a better version of ourselves, that doesn't happen overnight. It happens through honesty and awareness and the willingness to keep growing every single day. And actually, reflecting on these patterns also, made me notice something interesting in the running world. Something about the way people train and the way people sometimes present their training to others. And I will talk about that in the next episode. Thank you for listening. Keep working. I will talk to you soon.